Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. They came for my dock first with letters full of threats and lies. Then came the cut wires, the midnight cars, and the so-called laws they invented to scare me off my own land. I'm Lincoln Hayes, and this is how a quiet lake cabin turned into ground zero for a war with an HOA tyrant. I always thought I'd seen enough nonsense during my years working as a marine engineer, patching up vessels in storms, and dealing with clients who believed duct tape was a miracle cure. But nothing, not even surviving a ship engine fire in the middle of Lake Superior, prepared me for the kind of madness that would come from living near a homeowners association. My name is Lincoln Hayes. I'm 52, and I built my cabin by Whispering Lake with my own two hands on land I bought outright over a decade ago. The place is modest, but I designed every inch of it to blend into the surroundings. Dark cedar siding, a roofline low enough not to scar the skyline, and a dock that feels like an extension of the shoreline. No intrusive fences, no screaming colors, and definitely no neighbors telling me what color my porch railings should be. The cabin stands on sturdy pilings just above the waterline, as if floating over the lake's surface. I used certified eco-materials, got every permit stamped by the county office, and even made sure my septic system was as environmentally friendly as they come. I have no power lines running from the HOA grid, no pipes crossing their land, and no contractual ties to their manicured empire. My small slice of heaven sits on its own parcel of land, and the paperwork explicitly states that I'm outside the jurisdiction of Whispering Lake shores. That suited me just fine. I run a small company that services private docks and lock systems around Michigan, and my life has always been about self-reliance. The last thing I need is someone lecturing me about the height of my grass. It was just 3 weeks after I'd finished renovating my pier, new treated planks, a fresh coat of marine sealant, that I found the letter. It was folded neatly in an envelope stamped with the HOA's official logo, which looked like a cheap attempt at classiness, complete with a faux gold crest. The handwriting on the outside was sharp, almost angry, like someone carving into the paper. I opened it while standing on my porch, half expecting some kind of welcome message. Instead, I found a threat wrapped in legal jargon. The letter claimed my structure violated the visual harmony of the lakefront, that it had been erected without the consent of the HOA Council, and that I was required to dismantle or remove all unauthorized building components within 35 hours, not even days. Whoever wrote this had a flair for the dramatic. The letter was signed by Dolores Whitmore, president of Whispering Lake Shores HOA. I'd heard rumors about her, a retired zoning inspector with a taste for power and a face that always looked like she'd just smelled sour milk. Some people called her the Queen of Whispering Lake. To me, she was just another bureaucrat looking for someone to push around. I read the letter twice, then chuckled in disbelief. The audacity of claiming authority over land they didn't own was absurd. My property line wasn't just clear on paper, it was physically marked with boundary posts set by county surveyors years ago. I walked to my filing cabinet inside, pulled out my stack of deeds and permits, and laid them out on the table like playing cards. Every stamp, every signature, every date confirmed what I already knew. I was not, and never had been, under their control. Still, I wasn't about to let this slide. People like Dolores thrive when others ignore their nonsense. I scanned the letter, forwarded it to my attorney, and by evening, I had a response drafted on his letterhead. It was the legal equivalent of a middle finger, complete with copies of my property survey and county permits. The letter ended with a reminder that trespassing on my land or interfering with my property would lead to immediate legal action. I sent it via certified mail and also dropped a copy into the HOA's mailbox. I figured that would be the end of it. But experience told me that someone who gives you a 35-hour deadline isn't the type to quietly back down. That night, I sat on the porch with a mug of strong coffee watching the moon reflect on the water, thinking how ridiculous it was that a group of retirees with too much time on their hands thought they could bully me. I heard the faint hum of a car engine slowing down near my driveway. A black SUV lingered at the edge of my property for a moment, headlights scanning my cabin like it was a crime scene. I stood up, made sure they saw me, and the car rolled off. I couldn't see the driver, but I had a feeling I already knew who sent them. It was the first whisper of trouble, the kind you feel in your gut before the real storm hits. The next morning, I planned to head out early to check a client's dock 2 towns over. I was halfway through brewing coffee when the lights flickered and went out. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing with the power lines, but when I checked, the connection box leading from the main grid to my cabin had been tampered with. Someone had cut the auxiliary line I'd installed last month as backup power for my tools. My main solar system was still intact, but the deliberate sabotage made my blood boil. There was no doubt in my mind that this wasn't random. I spent the next hour replacing the damaged line and tightening the locks on my utility box. When I called my attorney again, I could almost hear him rolling his eyes through the phone, muttering something about these HOA types being rabid when they feel challenged. He advised me to document everything, every cut wire, every strange car, every letter. So, I did. By the time evening rolled around, I had 3 sets of cameras ready to mount along the edge of my property, powered by solar batteries and aimed at every possible point of approach. I thought about Dolores Whitmore while I tightened the last bracket for a camera. I could almost imagine her sitting in her oversized lakefront mansion, sipping white wine and plotting how to bend everyone around the lake to her will. She probably didn't realize she'd picked a fight with someone who'd spent half his life dealing with worse storms than her passive-aggressive letters. I wasn't going anywhere, and if she wanted war, she'd find out exactly how stubborn I could be. The night after sending my attorney's response, I barely slept. It wasn't fear exactly, more like the gut-level irritation of knowing someone was poking at my boundaries, testing how far they could push before I pushed back. Around midnight, I stepped out onto the porch, the air sharp with early spring chill, and scanned the shoreline. The lake was calm, a dark sheet of glass broken only by a lone loon calling in the distance. That's when I caught the faint glow of headlights again, moving slowly near the tree line. Whoever it was, they had the subtlety of a raccoon rummaging through trash cans. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the sound of gravel crunching. As I reached the end of my driveway, the car, an older gray sedan, stopped for just a second. I raised the beam of my flashlight, catching a glimpse of someone inside holding up a phone or camera. I didn't say a word, just stood there, letting them know I saw them. After a tense beat, the car rolled backward, then sped off into the night. My cameras weren't even fully set up yet, but I made a mental note to install them first thing in the morning. If Dolores thought sneaking around in the dark would scare me, she'd underestimated how many nights I've spent alone in rough conditions, with worse things than HOA spies lurking in the shadows. I finally got to bed, only to be woken a few hours later by the harsh knock of someone pounding on my front door, the kind of knock that makes you think the place is on fire. I pulled on my jeans, grabbed the flashlight again, and opened the door to find 2 uniformed officers standing there. One looked young, maybe mid-20s, trying too hard to seem authoritative. The other had the weary eyes of someone who'd been dealing with small-town drama his entire career. The older one tipped his hat slightly. "Mr. Hayes?" "Yeah," I said, still groggy but already irritated. "What's going on?" "We got an anonymous call about suspicious activity here," the younger officer said. "The caller claimed you've been building an illegal extension on your property and something about illegal waste storage." He didn't sound convinced by his own words. I let out a humorless laugh. "Illegal extension? You're welcome to look around. This cabin has been approved, stamped, and blessed by the county inspector himself. As for waste, the only waste I see around here is whoever's wasting your time." The older cop smirked and nodded. "I figured as much. HOA trouble?" "Bingo," I said, stepping aside. "Come in, or do you need me to show you the whole place?" They glanced around, did a quick perimeter check, and apologized for waking me. Before they left, the older officer leaned in slightly and muttered, "You didn't hear this from me, but the call came from someone connected to the HOA council. They're persistent. Be careful, Mr. Hayes. They're known for pulling this kind of stunt." "Appreciate the heads up," I said, shaking his hand firmly. "Don't worry, I'll handle it." Once they left, I brewed a pot of strong coffee and got to work. I spent the entire morning setting up my solar cameras around the perimeter, covering every path that led to my property. By noon, I had a small fortress of silent, blinking eyes watching every angle. I uploaded the feeds to my cloud account and checked the live stream from my phone. If anyone so much as sneezed near my driveway, I'd know. Later that afternoon, while tightening the bolts on the dock's railing, I heard my phone buzz. A message popped up from an unknown number. "Enjoy your little cameras. They won't save your shack when the council votes to take it down." No signature, but I didn't need one. It had Dolores written all over it, passive-aggressive with a splash of delusion. I stared at the message, debating whether to respond, but decided against it. Engaging would only feed her ego. Instead, I saved the message as evidence and forwarded it to my attorney. By early evening, I was walking back from the dock when I saw another envelope stuck under my truck's windshield wiper. No stamp this time, just a single piece of paper folded in half. In bold black ink, it read, "You have one last chance to comply. The board will enforce action if you don't vacate." I crumpled it up and tossed it straight into the fire pit. Let them try. If they wanted war, I was more than ready to give them a fight they wouldn't forget. The next morning started out like any other. I brewed my coffee, stepped onto the porch, and took in the calm, glassy surface of Whispering Lake. But when I drove down the narrow lane that leads to the main road, my mood shattered. About 50 yards from my cabin, the path was blocked by a massive concrete barrier, like someone had decided to build a miniature bunker overnight. On it, painted in bold black letters, were the words, HOA property, no access. My first reaction was disbelief, then a slow burn of anger that settled deep in my chest. I parked my truck, got out, and inspected the mess. The dirt path leading down toward my dock had been deliberately dug up, deep trenches carved across it, as if someone had taken a backhoe and tried to erase my driveway from existence. The ground was freshly disturbed, wet from the early dew. Whoever did this had come in the dead of night. My cameras hadn't picked up anything, but I realized too late that I hadn't pointed them toward the far end of the lane. That would change today. I pulled out my phone and started snapping photos from every angle. As I walked around the barrier, I noticed faint boot prints in the dirt and the tire tracks of heavy equipment. Someone went to a lot of trouble to make this look official, but I knew damn well it wasn't legal. While I was documenting the damage, a voice called out from across the lakefront. I looked up to see Jim, who runs the old marina on the other side. He waved, then walked over, his work boots crunching on the gravel. "Morning, Lincoln," he said, eyeing the concrete slab. "I saw a couple of guys out here late last night. Bright orange vests, unmarked truck. I figured you knew about it." "Did they say who they were with?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "Didn't have to," Jim said, crossing his arms. "I recognized one of them, Trent, the maintenance guy from the HOA. He was barking orders at the other two, like he was building a damn toll gate." I clenched my jaw and nodded. "Thanks, Jim. Appreciate the heads up." Back at my truck, I called the sheriff's office. Within 30 minutes, a county deputy rolled up in his SUV. Officer Wayne, a solid guy with a tired but fair face, stepped out. I'd dealt with him a few times before when they needed someone to assess dock damage during storms. He walked around the barrier, jotting notes in his pad, and let out a low whistle. "Let me guess," he said. "This is HOA business?" "Bingo," I said, showing him the photos on my phone. "They've crossed the line, literally." Wayne nodded. "I'll file an incident report. This is clearly private property. They have no right to obstruct your driveway. You want me to arrange for removal?" "No need," I said with a thin smile. "I'll handle it myself." After Wayne left, I made a quick call to a local equipment rental company. By the afternoon, I was sitting behind the wheel of a rented mini excavator, tearing through the concrete block like it was papier-mâché. Each swing of the bucket sent chunks flying, and by the time I was done, there was nothing left but rubble. I scraped the trenches flat, then filled them with gravel from my own stockpile. When I was finished, I parked my truck proudly in the restored lane, as if to stake my flag back in the ground. Before heading inside, I snapped more photos of the cleaned-up road and emailed them to my attorney, along with a detailed report of the incident. I also sent a copy to the county office, attaching Jim's statement as a witness. If Dolores and her crew thought they could bully me into submission, they were about to find out how badly they'd underestimated me. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I drove past the HOA's community entrance on my way to the hardware store. At the gate, Dolores herself was standing with two other board members, clipboard in hand, as if conducting some kind of royal inspection. She saw my truck and gave me a look that could have curdled milk. I slowed just enough to roll down the window. "Hey, Dolores," I called with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Nice barrier you built. I think it looks better in pieces." Her face went crimson. I didn't wait for a response. I just drove off, the image of her clenched jaw giving me enough satisfaction to get through the evening. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. The HOA had played its first real card, and something told me they had plenty more where that came from. A few days passed with an eerie silence, almost as if the HOA had retreated to lick its wounds after my little demolition stunt. I used the time to reposition my cameras, aiming them not just at the driveway, but also along the tree line, where I suspected they'd try sneaking in again. I wasn't paranoid, just experienced enough to know that bullies rarely stop after the first punch. And right on cue, on the morning of the fourth day, I found a fat envelope in my mailbox, stamped with the HOA's gaudy gold emblem. I opened it right there on the porch, my coffee going cold in my hand. Inside were freshly printed documents that looked uncomfortably official. According to this new update, my parcel of land had been part of Whispering Lake Shores HOA since 2006. There was a so-called amendment to the original property plat, complete with signatures, seals, and references to a meeting that had allegedly taken place over 15 years ago. I didn't know whether to laugh or to call someone to check my blood pressure. The audacity was impressive, I'll give them that. It was like they'd taken a crash course in amateur forgery. I wasted no time. I called my attorney Mark, who sounded both annoyed and gleeful at the same time. "They've crossed into felony territory now," he said after skimming the scanned copies I emailed him. "I'll pull the county records to cross-check, but I'm willing to bet my next paycheck that these so-called documents didn't exist until recently." By the afternoon, Mark confirmed my suspicion. The county's registry showed no trace of these amendments until just 3 weeks ago, when someone with administrative access attempted to modify the digital records. The digital signature of a county registrar was present, but when Mark reached out to the registrar herself, she swore she hadn't signed or filed anything. It was a textbook case of tampering. My annoyance turned into cold anger. This wasn't just HOA harassment anymore. This was fraud, plain and simple. I drove down to the sheriff's office with a folder full of documents, my original deeds, and the forged junk they'd sent me. The deputy who took my statement raised an eyebrow as I laid out the timeline. "You realize," he said, "if this checks out, we're looking at criminal charges. Whoever did this might have roped in someone inside the county office." "Good," I said flatly. "Let's find out how deep this rot goes." That evening, just as I was locking up my tools, I saw a familiar silhouette approaching along the shore path. Dolores Whitmore herself, dressed in a cream-colored blazer that looked absurd against the muddy lakeside, stopped a few yards away. Her expression was a mix of arrogance and fake civility. "Mr. Hayes," she called out, "we really should talk." I folded my arms, making it clear I had zero interest in small talk. "If you're here to apologize, I'm listening. If not, you can turn around and walk right back." She gave me a thin smile. "Let's not be dramatic. The HOA board and I believe it's in everyone's best interest if you consider alternative options. We could buy this property from you, for a fair price, of course. Then you wouldn't have to deal with all this unpleasantness." I laughed, loud and unfiltered. "You're forging documents to claim my land, and now you want me to sell it to you? That's not a negotiation, Dolores. That's extortion with a side of stupidity." Her smile tightened into a grimace. "Think carefully, Mr. Hayes. Fighting the HOA will be exhausting. We have lawyers. We have resources. You're just one man with a shack." I took a step closer, lowering my voice to something sharp and steady. "One man with a shack who knows how to fight. And one man with cameras, documents, and a lawyer who loves tearing apart bullies like you. Leave my property. Now." She stared at me for a moment, her jaw tightening, then turned on her heel and walked off without another word. I watched her go, already knowing this wasn't the end. If anything, I'd just thrown gasoline on the fire. But I didn't care. This was my land, and I wasn't about to roll over because some retired zoning inspector with a power complex wanted to play Queen of the Lake. It didn't take long for Dolores and her cronies to escalate again. Just when I thought they'd exhausted their bag of dirty tricks, they found a new way to crawl under my skin. On Monday morning, I woke up to find a copy of the Whispering Lake Shores Weekly Bulletin tucked under my truck's windshield wiper. Normally, I'd toss their propaganda straight into the fire pit, but the bold headline caught my attention. "Local cabin violates environmental standards. County review pending." The article beneath it was a hit piece, filled with lies about how my dock and cabin were damaging the shoreline, how I had illegally dredged the water, and how my property was an eyesore for the entire community. No author was listed, but I didn't need to guess. This was Dolores's handiwork. It had her signature arrogance, dressed up in faux concern for the environment. The article had been distributed all around the lake. By lunchtime, I got calls from two people I barely knew. One asking if I was okay, the other warning me that Dolores was parading around town claiming I was on the verge of losing my land. I decided it was time to shift from defense to offense. I wasn't going to let her tarnish my name or scare me off my property. Later that day, I took a drive to the marina. As I walked down the pier, Jim waved me over. "You're not going to believe this," he said, pointing toward a stack of garbage bags dumped on my shoreline. At first, I thought maybe a careless fisherman had left trash behind, but when I got closer, I saw the HOA logo printed on some of the bags. Someone had deliberately dumped trash to make it look like I was polluting the lake. Jim shook his head, disgusted. "I saw two guys in reflective vests earlier. They came from the direction of the HOA maintenance yard." I knew something was up. I took pictures of the trash, carefully documenting everything. Then I checked the footage from my new cameras. Sure enough, around dawn, two men had dragged the bags onto my property. The resolution was sharp enough to catch their faces. One of them was Trent, the same HOA handyman Jim had mentioned during the concrete block incident. That was all the evidence I needed. I forwarded the photos and video clips to my attorney, then called the sheriff's office again. By mid-afternoon, Deputy Wayne was standing next to me, staring at the footage on my tablet. He muttered a curse under his breath. "They're digging themselves into a hole," he said. "This isn't just harassment anymore. This is trespassing and illegal dumping. We'll question them." Dolores must have heard about my complaint because that very evening, she organized an impromptu HOA community meeting at their lakeside hall. I got wind of it when one of the newer homeowners, a guy named Paul, called me. "She's telling everyone you're a danger to the lake," he said. "You might want to show up and defend yourself." So I did. I arrived halfway through the meeting, dressed in my work jacket and boots, still smelling faintly of wood sealant. The room went quiet when I stepped inside. Dolores was standing at the front, holding a stack of printed photos, old shots of my dock taken years ago. "And as you can see," she was saying, "this structure was built without the HOA's consultation." "Enough," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. I walked to the front, pulling out my own folder. "You've been lying to everyone here. These people deserve the truth." I laid out copies of my official permits and county inspection approvals on the table. I even had the footage of Trent dumping garbage on my property, which I played on my tablet for everyone to see. A ripple of shock went through the room. "This is what your HOA leadership is doing," I said, looking directly at Dolores. "This isn't about community standards. It's about control and intimidation." Dolores's face turned red, but she tried to regain control. "Mr. Hayes is twisting things. We only—" "Save it," I said sharply. "If anyone here doubts me, I'll gladly show you every legal document I own. And the sheriff's office has already been notified about the illegal dumping. You can explain that to them." The room was buzzing as I walked out, leaving Dolores fuming in front of her own board. I knew she wasn't finished, but something had shifted. Some of her followers were starting to see the cracks in her armor. The HOA went silent for a few days after I crashed their little meeting, but I knew it was just the calm before another storm. By Friday, my attorney Mark called with news that confirmed my suspicions. "Lincoln," he said, "I got word that someone from the HOA tried to file a complaint with the county environmental office against your property. They're claiming your dock is unsafe for wildlife. We're looking at a coordinated smear campaign." I swore under my breath. "What's next? They gonna say I'm harboring pirate ships?" Mark chuckled darkly but told me to stay alert. He was already pushing for a formal county review of HOA activities. The county prosecutor was interested, especially after seeing evidence of forged documents and illegal dumping. That night, I decided to check my perimeter cameras before heading to bed. Around 11 p.m., one of the motion sensors pinged. The feed from the west side of my property lit up, showing two men in hooded sweatshirts creeping along the tree line with flashlights. I grabbed my heavy mag light and walked out to the porch, watching them through the camera feed on my phone. They were tampering with something near my utility box. I didn't shout. I didn't even turn on the porch light. Instead, I called Deputy Wayne directly. "Got uninvited guests," I said. "Two of them, west side. Looks like they're cutting cables." "Stay inside," Wayne told me. "I'm 5 minutes out." I stayed put but kept my eyes on the intruders through the cameras. One of them managed to pry open the utility box and snip a wire before they realized headlights were approaching. Wayne's SUV came barreling down the road, sirens off but lights flashing. The two men bolted, one tripping over the gravel and nearly face-planting. Wayne was out of his vehicle in seconds, flashlight beam locking on them like a sniper. He caught one of them, a young guy in his 20s I didn't recognize. The other vanished into the woods. When Wayne brought the guy over to me, the kid looked pale and nervous. "What's your name?" I asked. He mumbled something about working for the HOA maintenance team and that Ms. Whitmore told him this was part of a routine inspection. Wayne raised an eyebrow at that. "Routine inspection, my ass," I muttered. Wayne hauled the kid to his SUV and told me they'd be filing trespassing charges. By the next morning, my land was crawling with curiosity. Paul, the new homeowner who'd called me earlier that week, showed up with his phone out. "Hey, Lincoln, I saw the cop car last night." "What's going on?" I told him everything. The tampered cables, the fake documents, the smear campaign. He listened quietly and then said, "You know, a lot of people are tired of Dolores's power games. She's been finding residents for stupid things, like having the wrong shade of garden hose. I'll talk to some of them. Maybe we can back you up." True to his word, Paul started knocking on doors and rallying other homeowners. By Sunday afternoon, I found myself at an impromptu gathering at Jim's Marina. Half a dozen neighbors were there, swapping horror stories about Dolores and the HOA board. One couple told me they'd been fined for putting up a birdhouse without proper approval. Another guy, a retired trucker, said Dolores threatened to sue him over the unsightly color of his shed, which had been painted the same shade of blue for 20 years. The mood at the marina shifted from frustration to determination. "We should file a collective complaint," Jim said. "If they're pulling this crap with you, they'll do it to all of us sooner or later." I nodded. It was time to go big. I offered to share all my evidence, videos, photos, legal documents, with anyone willing to sign onto a joint statement against the HOA. Almost everyone agreed on the spot. By evening, I sent Mark an email with a list of names and signed declarations. "Looks like Dolores just picked a fight with the wrong community," I wrote. His response was almost gleeful. "This will be more than enough to escalate. We'll bring in the prosecutor." The lawsuit came faster than I expected. On Tuesday morning, a courier knocked on my door with a thick envelope stamped by the Whispering Lake Shores HOA legal team. They were officially suing me for illegal occupation of shared community land and failure to comply with established neighborhood guidelines. I stood on the porch reading the papers, half amused, half furious. They doubled down on the forged documents, waving them around like gospel. I didn't waste time. I called Mark. "They're going for a lawsuit," I said. Mark laughed, the kind of dry laugh you hear from someone who's been sharpening their legal teeth for years. "Good," he said. "We'll counter. We'll crush them for fraud, trespassing, vandalism, and harassment. This is the break we needed." That afternoon, Mark filed a countersuit in my name, attaching every piece of evidence we had: the forged documents, the videos of illegal dumping, the photos of the concrete block, and now the attempted sabotage of my power lines. We also added the statements from the neighbors. By the time Mark was done, the HOA wasn't just dealing with me. They were facing a collective complaint from 8 property owners and a formal investigation by the county prosecutor's office. The first court hearing was scheduled for Friday. I showed up in my best attempt at formal attire, clean jeans, a pressed shirt, and my boots polished enough to pass inspection. Across the courtroom sat Dolores, wearing a pearl necklace and a smug expression that made me want to laugh. She had 3 lawyers with her, all in matching dark suits, whispering like they were plotting the invasion of Normandy. When the hearing began, Dolores's team tried to paint me as an unruly neighbor who refused to cooperate with community standards. Their lead attorney even had the nerve to wave around the forged property records, claiming I had been part of the HOA since 2006. Mark calmly stood, handed the judge the original county plat maps and notarized deeds, and with surgical precision dismantled their argument. Within 15 minutes, it was clear to everyone in the room that something was rotten on the HOA's side. Then Mark pulled out the big guns, a forensic report proving the property documents had been altered just weeks ago with fake digital signatures and mismatched timestamps. The judge's eyebrows climbed so high I thought they'd hit his hairline. He paused the hearing to request an immediate verification from the county registrar, who confirmed, on speakerphone no less, that the documents were fraudulent. Dolores tried to speak up, but the judge silenced her with a sharp gavel strike. "This is not a debate, Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Your organization is now under formal scrutiny." The next blow came when Deputy Wayne and a county investigator testified about the harassment I had endured. Wayne presented his incident reports, the night call from the false complaint, the dumping of trash, and the sabotage attempt. When the judge saw the video of Trent dragging garbage bags onto my property, Dolores's face turned the color of a bad sunburn. By the end of the day, the court not only dismissed the HOA's claims against me, but also approved our countersuit to proceed. The judge even hinted that criminal charges for forgery and harassment might follow. Dolores stormed out of the courtroom, her pearl necklace nearly strangling her as she yanked it off in frustration. Outside the courthouse, a couple of neighbors who had come to watch the hearing clapped me on the shoulder. About time someone stood up to her, Jim said. She's been terrorizing this place for years. I smiled, but I wasn't celebrating just yet. This was just the beginning of a much bigger storm, and I had no intention of letting my guard down. The final hearing felt less like a lawsuit and more like a public execution, only Dolores and her board didn't realize they were the ones on the chopping block. In the weeks following the first court battle, Mark had dug up even more dirt. With the county prosecutor's help, we uncovered a string of suspicious HOA board decisions dating back years, all signed off by Dolores and a handful of loyalists. Several homeowners had been fined for bogus reasons, their payments funneled into a mysterious maintenance fund that didn't exist on any legitimate balance sheet. It was the kind of corruption that festers when no one fights back, and now the rot was spilling into the light. The courtroom was packed when we returned. Word had spread around Whispering Lake, and nearly half the neighborhood showed up to watch. Dolores walked in wearing another cream blazer, looking like she'd just swallowed a lemon. Her usual smugness was gone, replaced by tight-lipped anxiety. The rest of the board sat behind her like guilty schoolkids waiting for detention. Mark opened with a barrage of evidence. Bank statements showing HOA money routed into personal accounts, internal emails suggesting they'd intentionally targeted my property as a test case, and sworn statements from former board members who'd resigned after being pressured to sign fraudulent documents. One former treasurer admitted on the stand that Dolores had told him to fix the books after an audit threat. The jury and the judge were visibly unimpressed. Then came my turn. I took the stand and told the whole story, from the first threatening letter to the concrete barrier, the trash dumping, the power sabotage, and the forged records. I showed the video footage from my cameras and photos of every act of harassment. When the video of Trent dumping garbage played on the big screen, you could hear murmurs of disgust ripple through the audience. Dolores tried to object, but the judge snapped, "Mrs. Whitmore, I suggest you remain silent unless addressed." By the end of the day, it was over. The judge ruled in my favor on every count. My ownership of the property was reaffirmed. The forged documents were declared null and void, and the HOA was ordered to pay damages of $1,200,000, split among me and the neighbors who joined the collective complaint. More importantly, the county prosecutor announced that criminal charges were being filed against Dolores for fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. She was taken into custody right there in the courtroom. The sight of her being led away in handcuffs was something I'll never forget. It wasn't just justice, it was vindication. The aftermath was swift. The HOA board was dissolved, its assets frozen while investigators combed through years of shady transactions. For the first time in decades, the residents of Whispering Lake were free from the grip of a tyrant masquerading as a community leader. Some of my neighbors came by that evening, bringing beer and grilled steaks as a quiet thank you for standing my ground. We sat by the water, the sunset casting gold across the lake, and shared stories of all the ridiculous infractions Dolores had fined them for over the years. A week later, I rebuilt the dock steps and reinforced the shoreline path. I also had a custom iron sign made and bolted it to the entrance of my property. It read, "Private, always was, always will be." Every time I pass it, I smile. I'm not one for grand speeches or victory parades, but I know one thing for sure. They'll think twice before messing with me, or anyone else around here, again. As I sat on the porch that night, the lake calm and the stars bright overhead, I thought back to my years on the water. Storms come fast, and they test you in ways you don't expect. But like I learned long ago, you don't run from a storm, you face it head on, and when the waves settle, you build stronger than before.